Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Hello and good afternoon. Welcome back to the latest episode of Musical Musings, airing every Wednesday at 1 p.m. This program is broadcast from Rajamachan University of Technology, Peranakan. This program is in two parts. The first part will introduce a song and discuss its main themes, what it's all about. Then, we'll listen to the song and analyze the lyrics, looking especially at difficult vocabulary, slang, idioms, anything that might be hard to understand. Then we'll have news and the latest updates from the university, as always.
Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
This is Gary Gray, your host for Musical Musings. I'm a native English-speaking teacher at Rajamachan University, Peranakan. Today, we're going to go over a song called The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. We're choosing this song this week because, sadly, the writer of this song has recently passed. His name was Gordon Lightfoot. He led a nice long life, passing in his 80s. He is a folk singer from Canada. Folk music is somewhat soft music, but can still be fairly modern, and it tells a story. The story is sometimes more important than the music itself. In today's song, for example, you'll see that the music is pretty simple. In fact, the first half of our program may run a bit short, as we have a lot to talk about in the second half, because there are a lot of lyrics in this song. I should also tell you that another one of our featured singers recently passed. Several weeks ago, we listened to the song Turn the World Around. It's performed by Harry Belafonte. Sadly, Mr. Belafonte has also recently passed, both of them within the past few weeks. Our song this week seems pretty appropriate. It's kind of a sad song. And it's sad that we've lost the singer, Gordon Lightfoot. This is also his most popular song. There are a few other songs that come in close second. He's got quite a few popular songs. In my classroom, I sometimes perform some of Mr. Lightfoot's songs. I think his song Sundown is actually a little more popular among my students. So maybe you should look that song up. It's pretty good too. But today, we'll go over the song The Wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So before we get to the song and analyze its lyrics, let's talk about it more generally. What's this song all about? Well, the title says it all, but you might not understand some of the words in the title. What's a wreck? What's the Edmund Fitzgerald? Well, a wreck means a crash or an accident. For example, if two cars collide, you can call it a wreck. But a wreck is usually quite bad, possibly even destroying something. So, if the two cars just bump into each other, they get a little scratch, a little dent, you're not really going to call that a wreck. A wreck is a bad crash, possibly even a disaster. In this case, it was a complete disaster. And the Edmund Fitzgerald is just the name of a ship. It's a large workship that moves raw metal from one place to another. So we're talking about this ship wrecking. So this song is about a disaster with this ship. Sadly, it's a true story. Back in the 1970s, this ship was moving metal across a very large lake in the northern part of the United States. It ran into a storm and sank, with everyone on board dying. It was a big deal because there were quite a few deaths, 29 men on the ship. It was also a big deal because it was a mystery. No one really knew what happened. I mean, we all knew it was a storm that caused it, and it was a bad storm. But still, there were lots of other ships that successfully made it through. Also, another ship captain was in radio contact with the captain of the Edmund Fitzgerald. And the Fitzgerald's captain did say they were having a bit of trouble, but it was all under control. Not a big deal. And then no one heard from the ship again. So that's what this song is about. You should be aware that Gordon Lightfoot did add in some creative detail that we don't really know. I mentioned that we don't know how it sunk, but he says in the song how the ship sunk. Some research many, many years later discovered mostly what happened, so we kind of do know now. Not exactly, but mostly. Mr. Lightfoot actually altered the lyrics to reflect that, but we'll be listening to the original version of this song. So let's get to it. For those of you joining us via YouTube, copyright laws unfortunately prevent us from embedding the video in here. You should see a link to the song in the upper right corner of this video. So go ahead and click on that video link to listen to the song. Then once it's done, just click back here to get to the second part of our program. And for those of you listening to us streaming or on radio, we're just going to go right to the song now.
Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
All right, welcome back. This is a really long song, so we need to jump quickly into the analysis of the lyrics. There's so much here that may be hard to understand. Honestly, once it's explained, it's really easy to understand, as some of the difficult words and phrases are just names or simple sayings. So this song may seem confusing a little bit when you first listen to it, but it's actually a pretty simple story about the tragedy of the ship. So let's go. The song begins with some confusing words right away. The legend lives on from the Chippewa on down of the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. All right, the word legend, that just means a famous story. But what the heck is Chippewa and Gitche Gumee? What does that mean? The Chippewa is just a name. It's a tribe of native people in America. Just like in northern Thailand, we still have some tribal people that live in the hills, and their tribes probably have names. It's just like that. So that's where Gitche Gumee comes from as well. It's the big lake they call Gitche Gumee. That's the name the Chippewa call the lake that the ship was cruising on. The English name of the lake, and we'll hear it in the song, is Lake Superior. Lake Superior. The word superior means the biggest or best. There is a group of 5 lakes in the northern United States, which are all quite large and all connected. As a group, they're called the Great Lakes. Superior is, of course, the biggest of the 5. That's why it's called Lake Superior. Okay, so the song continues. The lake, it is said, never gives up her dead when the skies of November turn gloomy. Okay, never giving up her dead means that ships that sink may never be found, along with anyone who died on board. And this is especially true in the stormy season, which is around November or December. The whole winter can sometimes be stormy, but sometimes the lake gets ice on it and they can't ship. So really it's November, December is the stormy season. So it also says when the skies of November turn gloomy. Gloomy skies are dark and cloudy. It means a storm is coming. The song kind of connects 2 verses together, so they sound like one. The whole song does this. So we get to the next verse, but there's not really a break here, so it sounds like it's the same verse. And it begins, with a load of iron ore 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. And you can hear, I can't sing that well, but you can hear from the singing, and you heard in the song that it goes through that same kind of singing part of it. The actual music is the same, almost every line. Okay, so in this line, a load of iron ore 26,000 tons more than the Edmund Fitzgerald weighed empty. That's pretty easy. The ship is loaded with 26,000 tons of metal. The only word that might be a little weird there is the word ore, iron ore. What does that mean? Iron ore just means raw iron. It hasn't been made into anything yet. All right, and it goes on. That good ship and true was a bone to be chewed when the gales of November gave her lee. Okay, calling the ship true doesn't mean honest, like the word true, how we usually use it. But it's the same idea. It means it sails straight and steady. So you can see how they use that word similarly. It's not the same meaning. It doesn't mean honest, but it's straight and steady. Like they said, it's a good ship. And calling it a bone to be chewed means it's really tough. Think of a dog chewing on a bone. And the word gales. Gales are just strong winds. It's a term used in shipping. So all it's saying here is that the stormy, windy weather of November is coming early. Okay, now to the next two verses. Again, remember, it puts two verses together. The ship was the pride of the American side, coming back from some mill in Wisconsin. Okay, so Lake Superior is on the border between Canada and the U.S. Sometimes people just call the U.S. America. So maybe Canada has bigger, stronger ships. But this was a really great American ship. So that's why it says it's the pride of the American side. And it's just leaving a mill, which is sort of like a factory in Wisconsin. And that's a state in America on the west coast of Lake Superior. So the ship is going to be sailing from the west to the east on Lake Superior. All right, the next line. As the big freighters go, it was bigger than most, with a crew and good captain well seasoned. All right, this is a pretty simple line, maybe just a couple words that are difficult. A freighter is just a big ship that moves lots of stuff around. And calling the crew well seasoned means that they have a lot of experience. All right, we go on. Concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms when they left fully loaded for Cleveland. Okay, a term, the way the word is used here, is part of a contract, and a firm is another name for a company. So concluding some terms with a couple of steel firms. In other words, they've just finished making a deal with a metal company. They loaded up the iron, and now they're headed for Cleveland. Cleveland is a city at the other end of Lake Superior. And the verse finishes, and later that night when the ship's bell rang, could it be the north wind they'd been feeling? Okay, that line is pretty easy too. The bell is ringing because the ship is starting to move. And that's because the wind is starting to get strong. On to the next verse. The wind in the wires made a tattletale sound, and a wave broke over the railing. The phrase tattletale sound seems weird. Even I had to look that up. I didn't know what it meant. It's an old saying. It means that the wires are stretching in the wind and making it sound like they might snap. So the wires, there's wires on the boats. You can imagine on a big ship, there's wires that go around the edges, holding things down, whatever. The wind is blowing so strong, it's stretching the wires, and it sounds like they might snap. And when you talk about a wave breaking, it's when it crashes. So a wave broke over the railing means that a wave crashed over the front of their ship. And every man knew, as the captain did too, 'twas the witch of November come stealing. All right, this one's a little tricky. What in the world is the witch of November? That is just a nickname they have in that part of America for the storms. So the witch of November is a nickname for the storms. And when it says it's come stealing, in other words, it's coming to take them away. Basically, it's a bad and dangerous storm. Moving along. The dawn came late and the breakfast had to wait when the gales of November came slashing. Okay, pretty easy here. Dawn is sunrise. It was dark, so it seemed like the sun hadn't even come up just because the storm was so bad. And it says the gales are slashing. It just means the winds are hitting hard. Remember, gales are winds. So slashing, that's when you hit something. So it means the winds are hitting them hard. When afternoon came, it was freezing rain in the face of a hurricane west wind. All right, is anything there confusing? I don't think so. The only thing is, they weren't getting a real hurricane, of course, not in the middle of a lake, but the winds were just that strong. They were as strong as a hurricane. All right, the song now takes a very short instrumental break, then comes in with the next verse. When supper time came, the old cook came on deck, saying, fellas, it's too rough to feed ya. All right, fella, that's like saying guys. Fellas, hey fellas. That's like saying, hey guys. All right, so the cook is just saying the ship is moving around too much. He can't prepare the food. At 7 p.m. the main hatchway caved in. He said, fellas, it's been good to know ya. All right, so the hatchway is sort of like a door to go beneath the top deck of the ship. So with that caved in, the water that comes on is being able to go down to the bottom of the ship, so they're flooding with water. This didn't really happen. This is where Gordon later changed the words to the song. But this is how he wrote it originally. And when the cook says, fellas, it's been good to know ya, he's saying goodbye. He knows they're in trouble. All right, the next line. The captain wired in, he had water coming in, and the good ship and crew were in peril. All right, to wire in just means he radioed in. This is the call he made to the other captain. Remember, we talked about that in the first part. He said they were getting water in, but he thought they could handle it. He thought they'd be okay. They weren't. They were in peril. The word peril means dangerous. It's a very bad situation. And then the verse finishes up. And later that night, when his lights went out of sight, came the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. All right, that one's pretty easy to understand. This line, his lights went out because they sank. And that was the wreck of the Edmund Fitzgerald. So now the ship and crew are gone. So the next verse starts sadly. Does anyone know where the love of God goes when the waves turn the minutes to hours? In other words, where is God to help when they're in this desperate situation? And he talks about minutes turning to hours. You know how something bad seems to just last much longer than it really does? Good things go by so fast. Bad things, it seems like they go on forever. So that's the minutes turning into hours. And also, sadly, it continues, the searchers all say they'd have made Whitefish Bay if they'd put 15 more miles behind her. Okay, in other words, had they gotten just 15 miles more, in other words, put 15 more miles behind her, so they've gone 15 more miles, they would have gotten into a place called Whitefish Bay. It's just the name of a place, a part of the lake. But that bay provides some protection from the waves. So they would have all survived if they could have just gotten 15 miles further. The song goes on. They might have split up, or they might have capsized, or they might have broke deep and took water. That's all about how we don't know what happened. And actually later, it was learned that they did split up. So capsized means the boat flipped over, but that didn't happen. Broke deep means it dove into the water coming over a large wave. It didn't. I suppose it could have, and that could have caused it to break up, but it broke up. So we knew that later. That's many years later from some research that was done. But when the song was written, we didn't know any of that. All right, and then we finish up with that verse. And all that remains is the faces and the names of the wives and the sons and the daughters. Okay, in other words, they found almost nothing of the ship or its crew. They just found a few small pieces. So the only thing to remember it by are the people that got left behind, the family, basically, of the crew members. All right, now we get to the next verse, and this next verse is really just talking about the 5 Great Lakes I mentioned earlier. So we're not going to talk too much about this verse, but let's go through it. It goes, Lake Huron rolls, Superior sings, in the ruins of her ice-water mansion. Honestly, that's really just poetic. There's not much meaning here. So we go to the next line. Old Michigan steams like a young man's dreams. Its islands and bays are for sportsmen. All right, so we do get a few names here that might confuse you. Huron, Superior, and Michigan. We've already talked about Superior, but those are 3 of the 5 lake names. So Huron is another one. Michigan is another one. You might have heard of Michigan. You might think, isn't that a state in America? It is. It's also the name of one of the lakes. And of course, that lake is next to the state of Michigan. So Huron, Superior, and Michigan are 3 of the 5 lake names. And farther below, Lake Ontario takes in what Lake Erie can feed her. All right, so Lake Ontario and Lake Erie are the 2 remaining lakes. And Ontario feeds into Erie. And I think I actually sang that line a little bit wrong. I think it says, takes in what Lake Erie can send her, as the line says. Okay, I think that's really how it goes. But it means the same thing. It feeds on Lake Ontario, feeds into Lake Erie. Okay, and then the last line in this verse, and the iron boats go as the mariners all know, with the gales of November remembered. I think it goes up there at the end of that verse. I think I sang that one wrong too. All right, so mariners are sailors. So in other words, sailors always keep in mind the storms that come in November. All right, we get a little instrumental break, and then the final verse. In a musty old hall in Detroit they prayed in a maritime sailor's cathedral. Musty, that's like an old damp smell that some buildings have. And a cathedral is just like a church. So this is an old church for sailors and their families. And Detroit is just a city near the Great Lakes. It's actually in Michigan. Remember, we were talking about Michigan. All right, then we go on. The church bell chimed till it rang 29 times for each man on the Edmund Fitzgerald. The word chimed just means the bell rang. Pretty simple line here. 29 men died on the ship, so they rang the bell 29 times. The final verse then ends with a repeat of the first verse, so we don't need to go over that. All right. Wow, that is a long song, but it's really a beautiful song, even though it's about a tragedy. And like I said, it's a true story. Gordon Lightfoot altered a few details, but not much. And he did change the line about the main hatchway caving in after it was discovered that this didn't happen. The family of the lost sailors mostly loved this song. It's as a tribute to their lost loved ones. But 1 or 2 were a little bit bothered by that line about the hatchway. Why? Because it wouldn't cave in if it were properly secured. So it's like saying they did something wrong by saying the main hatchway caved in. So then you're blaming them for this tragedy. So they didn't really like that line. And many years later, a submarine located the ship and found that it split in 2. And the main hatchway did not cave in. It just split in 2 and sunk. So Gordon Lightfoot changed those words. Rest in peace to Gordon Lightfoot and to Harry Belafonte, who we talked about several weeks ago. All right, let's take a short break, and then we'll get to the RMUTP news.
Musical musings, musical musings, musical musings, musical musings.
Thank you for joining us for today's Musical Musings program. Please stay with us and tune back in next week for another great song. And please don't forget to subscribe to our channel.
Musical